Hello everybody and welcome to the GMS Magazine channel. I am Paco Garcia, your host, and this is the RPG Interview Room, a show both in video and podcast format in which I am lucky enough to get together with some of the best people in the world of role-playing games and talk with them about their work, their likes, dislikes, and a lot more stuff. In today's episode, I have with me Matt Corley, who you may not know by name, but he's done an absolutely amazing, insane amount of work for Kobold Press, among others, and he has some absolutely fascinating games coming out very soon indeed. Matt is somebody who truly enjoys horror and gets it big time, so much so that he's actually going to make a game about a serial killer in which you are, as a player, a character, one of his victims. I know, it sounds really dark, doesn't it? Well, it is also absolutely fascinating. Seriously, I was blown away by it. But I'm not going to tell you anything else. Do sit back. Relax the video if you're watching it in the YouTube channel. Enjoy the podcast if you are on the move. Remember to subscribing either way. Leave me a comment, please, which is always very, very welcome. Leave us a review in iTunes if you listen that way. But here's Matthew. Matt, welcome. Welcome to the show. I was saying at the beginning when I was doing the presentation that I will do in the future, but you don't know this yet. We were talking about you before. I don't really know who you are or anything. We've seen each other in Twitter. We've interacted in Twitter. I think you have a really cool project. I know you've done an awful lot of things for a fantastic company that's Kobold Press, but I'm here to discover you and let other people discover what you do and why you do it and so on and so forth. But I have no idea what your ability to answer questions is. So we're going to start with a quick exercise to see how you do, what kind of person you are. So I'm going to ask you 5 questions. Question number 1. Tea or coffee?
Tea.
Okay. Question number 2. The mountain or the beach?
Beach.
Okay. Question number 3. Cars or motorbikes?
Motorbike.
Okay. Question number 4. Science fiction or fantasy?
Another tough one.
Let's
go fantasy.
Okay, fantasy it is. And last but not least, zombies or vampires?
Vampires.
Okay, good. You know how to answer questions. You've answered them truthfully and correctly, even though the game was that you were going to reply them incorrectly. So now I know that you cannot answer wrongly. That means that you can only tell the truth. That's a weakness I'm going to explode.
Sounds good.
Okay, no, seriously. Okay, you are a pretty experienced writer. You have Saturday morning scenarios, and you've written for Kobold Press, GM Guilds, I believe, as well. You've done a fair amount of work, but tell me a little bit about you. How long have you actually been playing and writing role-playing games and adventures?
Sure. So I played my first role-playing game in 2nd grade, which was in 1983. And I stole the red box from my older brother, and took the books because I wanted to read the DM book and the adventures and all that stuff so that when we played, I could cheat and win. Because I was 8. and Nate was, I guess, 11 and a half, 12 then. And I kind of kept up with it, ever since then. I think I did what most of the people our age did, which was as we hit high school and college, and even when we kind of, became adults, we kind of fell away from it in a lot of cases. I think it's interesting that folks these days have such a hard time understanding really kind of two things, especially if they've come to the hobby relatively recently or if they're just, younger than we are, which is that one, the internet was not a thing. So you could not just find people online because there was no online. So it was really hard to actually find other players. And the other one was a lot of us were kind of, a little bit shy about sharing that we like D&D as much as we may have, or the games that we played. So it was really hard to find other folks for that reason as well. Even your friends and such, unless they were really good friends, they tended to not know that it was something that you liked. And so, again, I took a pretty long hiatus from the game, actually. I kept up with it and everything, but I didn't play very much at all. And funny enough, I got divorced about 6 years ago, which that's not the funny part. But one of the things I did was focus more on things that I enjoyed and focus more on, myself and doing the things I wanted to do that made me happy. And I was actually working out with a friend who was my coach, and he asked me if I wanted to play Magic. And I had actually played Magic in college. We both found out that was very, very expensive, very, very fast. He also said, well, what about role-playing games? And I said, let's do it. And so that was about 6 years ago. And that just kind of morphed from there. I had been freelance writing for Jiu-Jitsu Times, which is a Brazilian jiu-jitsu magazine that circulated in the US, like everywhere actually. And I'd been writing for them, freelancing for a while, and kind of stopped doing that and slowly transitioned to freelancing. My first job was actually with Kobold Press as a freelancer.
That's quite a baptism of fire, because Kobold Press, they are not the kind of company who say, oh, we'll just take anybody. They can afford to bring in the best because they are one of the best companies out there. How did that come about?
Yeah, so this is going to be very bizarre. And anybody that listens to this, I've told the story obviously a few times, and I always tell folks, you know what? Put your hat in there, see what happens. You never know. And what happened was I wrote, and my girlfriend, Kelly and I have been together for 6 years, almost 5 years now. And she's hugely supportive of my writing, and that's made a huge difference. She doesn't play games, but she's very happy that I do it. And so she saw me agonizing over whether or not I should send something into Scott Gable for the website. Okay. And finally, she's just like, just send it. Just stop asking, just send it. I don't want to hear it. I want you to just try. Good. And so I did. And kind of long story short, Scott published it. And we started kind of emailing back and forth kind of randomly. And one of the things I told him was that I had Tales of the Margrave. You'll probably hear me say that 2 different ways. I go back and forth between Margrave and Margrave, just because I do. I don't know why. I spelled it wrong 40 times in the book too, I promise.
Your name, you can do anything with it you like.
I know. And so I told Scott, though, that I was going to redo the first adventure, The Hollow by Richard Pett, and play it for my players. Unbeknownst to me, he sent that to Wolfgang. And Wolfgang has a huge soft spot for Tales. Loves it. I mean, it's probably one of the books that got them on the map. It was one of their very first books that they did about 10 or 12 years ago. And next thing I knew, I get an email saying, well, Wolfgang would be interested in you converting it. I'm like, oh, The Hollow. He's like, no, the book. It's like, oh, okay. Well, sure, let's do it. And, I tell folks that I think that Wolfgang might have thought I was a different Matt. Because at that point I had 2 things on his website, and that was it. I had professional writing credits in nonfiction. And I'm a pharmacist. I've been a pharmacist for over 20 years. I'm an exec in my with what I do. But again, this was a huge thing out of nowhere. Where that book went from the Pathfinder version was 90 pages or so. The 5e version is 2 books and a total of around 250. And anybody that's converted Pathfinder to 5e knows that you usually don't go that way, that taking out the Pathfinder stat box takes about 30% of the content out. So we probably tripled the size of that book and did all new art and everything. And so I just kind of kept getting new contracts to it. A lot of the new content in that book I wrote. I wrote one of the adventures, of course. And all of the mechanics were done by myself. I did, again, most of the new content in the actual Tales book and some of the content in the player's book too. And again, it was you like you said, it was a trial by fire. It was a random email that turned into, I guess, gosh, I think even my part was over 100,000 words.
That's a big novel.
I've done it 3 times now. That was the first of 3 so far. So yeah,
Okay.
I know it's funny. Chris Spivey wrote this once, and I love Chris's book. Chris is an incredibly talented writer and designer for Darker Hue. And I remember Chris wrote a tweet one time that said, "I love big books, and I cannot lie." You know, just off that old song. Sir Mix-a-Lot, and that's what I've done. Almost all of my projects are big. I think I've only got one combat. I've got one deep magic chapter that's $3 somewhere, and that's about the only small thing I think I've ever actually published so far.
Did you think when you started on these projects that it could explode, it would explode? Did you want it to happen? How did that come to pass? Because it's rare that a publisher takes something and allows it to become that much bigger, because the bigger it is, the costlier it becomes to produce,
right,
and the harder it is to sell.
Right. You know what? Wolfgang was great. He did not have any real limits on it. So, because it did, but it started out as a straight conversion. And then as I had to create the new monsters, because not all the monsters were in Tome of Beasts or even in Creature Codex. So, I mean, I wrote new monsters. I think I did 50 stat blocks, maybe.
Okay.
Maybe 57 sticking in my head for some reason, and about a dozen new magic items too, half a dozen spells. But he wanted it to be a complete book, and he wanted it to add. And so again, since anytime you convert from a different system, you have to remember that maybe those other products don't exist. Those monsters aren't there anymore, or they were SRD there, they're not now. And as he talked about it in the Kickstarter, and even when it was discussed online at the Facebook page, which the Kobold Press Facebook page is really good. There's a lot of Kobold Press people that read it constantly. And Wolfgang does pay attention to it. I have gotten a lot of contracts actually from it, because I'll read something that somebody says, and if it's something that's interesting to me and I think Wolfgang would like it, I say, well, you want me to just write that? It was on the Facebook page yesterday. And he said yes to that as often as not, actually, probably more often than not. And so again, we just kind of kept going and growing, and he liked what I was doing. I was on time. I was to spec. That's something I always tell writers, new writers especially, be on time, be on spec. Yes. And if you're not on time, that's actually not a big deal. Well, it kind of is, but it's a bigger deal to not let folks know.
Yes.
That you're not on time. It happens to all of us. I have been late on stuff too, but I've never been late as a surprise. And because again, I'm a publisher now too, and that's what I need to know. I totally understand that life happens. I also understand that we're all doing this off the side of our desk, because none of us are getting rich on this. Yep. And so as long as I understand and know where you are, I'm happy. I'm totally good with that. I don't think it's that big a deal. It's certainly not a deal breaker, especially when folks are really good about keeping you in the loop. And so I do. That's what I do. I make sure they understand. They have updates all the time. And Wolfgang and Sandy Peterson, Kim Mohan, some of the other folks that I've worked with are really, really happy about that. And that's just something I learned at work, to be honest with you. As a pharmacist for 20 years, I can't. That's just part of the job. And so I treat it like a job.
Well, and I think, to be honest, it should be, because at the end of the day, you may not be getting rich out of it, but some people are making a livelihood out of it, and they, depend on it. So when a writer or an artist doesn't communicate, because at the end of the day, is what you say, it's not necessarily just the delay, it's the communication that comes around that delay and the preparations that can be done to minimize the impact.
Absolutely.
People can be affected badly. So it's something that has to be said. What kind of writer are you? What happens when you actually sit down and start to write?
Oh, well, I have recently found that I have kind of 2 different processes. I have my maybe 3, who knows? When I'm writing games and designing games, that's one thing. And then when I'm writing straight fiction, that's another thing. I found straight fiction is actually really tough for me. Most days when I'm doing straight fiction, it's a 3, maybe 500 words is a good day. When I have a day that's all I'm doing and I can wake up, get my coffee, get writing, I can get maybe 1,000, which is really good. And I'm very happy with that. When I'm doing game design, there are enough other things going on that it kind of lets my creative brain rest, because there's a lot of, I was explaining this actually, my dad actually read one of my books the other day, Whispers in the Dark, and he said, I had no idea how much math and how complicated a game can be.
Okay.
And I was like, yeah, I mean, and that's why I told him, like, it's math. It is math. It's pretty math. It's fun math. But at the end of the day, if you really wanted to, all these games are a bunch of, it's addition and subtraction most of the time. And that's about it, basic probabilities. But doing the math and the design gives me a good break. And I've found, and I was talking about this with someone, that I can do the fiction part, the descriptions, the storyline. And when my brain gets a little bit tired of that, I can go do a stat block and I can come back. Or I can do something mechanical. And again, it's a different function for my brain anyway. It kind of gives me a break. And so the best day I've ever had with a game was, I think, 4,000-ish words, maybe a little bit more, which 4,000 words on a game is
a lot.
It is actually a scenario. You can actually write an entire one, and I don't do that often, but usually I can count on about 1,500 or so. So game writing is about twice as fast for me as straight fiction, roughly. And when I do game writing, I do a lot more templates and outlining, and I kind of build it up. The first draft will be 400 or 500 words of, bullet points and sentence fragments. And the next draft, I just kind of keep building on it as it goes. Whereas with fiction, again, I'll do a little bit of an outline, but I kind of just plug away and start at the beginning and go where it goes, which I think is why I go so slow. So I probably have to get a little better at that, but it's different, and I enjoy both a lot, actually.
But what is the aspect of writing games that it's the most enjoyable for you? I mean, what's the thing that makes you think about writing the game and thinking, yeah, I need to get on with this?
I think it's actually like the story part of it, the scenario part, the investigational part, the gameplay. I enjoy that a lot. I enjoy the mechanics too, so that's where it is too. So if I've been just writing stat blocks, I'm going to tell you, I just want to write a story. If I've just finished up a 300, 1,000 word story or 100,000 word story, you know what? I'd love to just do stat blocks for a couple weeks. I do. I love having a storyline to follow and to play, and to write. I think that's a lot of fun. Building mechanics to enhance the stat or enhance the story is also a lot of fun. Like the sanity rules I wrote for Lampslide and for Whispers in the Dark. I think they enhance the game. They have very little to do with combat, but they do. I think they help the players and the GMs get into it a little bit more and have a little bit more something else to do other than, I check the room for traps, or I see a goblin, I kill them, that kind of stuff. So it can interweave. And I think that with RPGs is what's so much fun, is that it really is a type of storytelling that can be very immersive, which is, again, kind of what I'm going to be doing with the Kickstarter. In about 5 weeks from tomorrow, actually.
Oh, tell me about that.
Yeah, so it's an expansion of Whispers in the Dark. So Whispers in the Dark, which actually, going back further, my Kickstarter last year was the first one I did by myself. I did it right on the heels of Tales of the Margrave, because I was basically told, like, you know what, Matt, people figured out your name. Let's go try it. I'm like, and a friend of mine, Toby, who wrote the maps or who drew all the maps in Lampslide, really kind of pushed me to do it. He's like, this is your best chance. So on Halloween Day, I started a Kickstarter, Lampslide Sanitarium. It is fully 5e compatible. We funded with $6,000 or something like that. It was so stressful. And it was, or is, a Victorian Gothic D&D setting. It can be an anachronism, and it works really well for that. You just plop it down in the middle of Waterdeep, or in the middle of Midgard somewhere, or anything like that. It's really neat for that. Lots of rules. There's sanity rules. There's rules for how you might adjust social encounters for if somebody's walking around wearing plate mail. If they're walking around wearing plate mail in 1895, Belgium or in France or Madrid or wherever, yeah, people are going to talk to them the same. They're walking around in the equivalent of a tank, what we would think of today. So it should interact. It should face things. And so that is how I wrote that book. It's like 200 pages. We got nominated for an Annie for our maps. Really, really great book. I love it. I'm very happy with it. But it's 5e. I mean, it is 5e. It uses 5e rules. And so Whispers in the Dark, which is what I wrote with MT Black, and we published that in January, the first week of January. And what it is, it's still 5th edition, but we took out classes.
Okay.
That was probably the biggest thing we did. And then we switched it up where your progression is more about your feats and your background and skills versus, I can get a second attack, or I can rage my 4th time today, or I can do X or Y or Z. And that change made it a much different book and made the gameplay a lot different too. There's some other things, hit dice are now 6s, period. There are no classes. Everybody's a D6.
Okay.
I adapted the sanity rules that I wrote for Lamb's Light for Whispers because of Whispers. The other big change we did was a short rest is now a day and a long rest is a week.
Okay.
Because everything, it's supposed to be more, I hate to say the word realistic when we're talking about RPGs, but again, it is supposed to be a little bit more realistic and have a little bit more veracity to it so that, I think that a lot of folks, it kind of annoys folk, not really annoys them, but it kind of limits things when you know that you can go in there and fight a dragon and be 1 hit point today, sleep 8 hours, and you're 150 tomorrow. And you act like nothing happened.
Yeah.
And sanity rules also add an element of progressive changes and changes that don't just go away. So, your character, by the time you're 8th, 6th, actually 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th level, you've got some scars. You've got some mental and physical scars that you have to deal with on the daily basis. And I think that's a great thing. I think it's a lot of fun.
Well, it gives a much greater challenge than otherwise would do. You have to think about other things that will make the game a lot more interesting. What was the most challenging part about designing that system? Because you have taken some decisions that sound pretty drastic to the average 5e player. If I told my D&D game people that, a short rest is going to be 8 hours, or sorry, it's going to be a day, and a long rest is going to be a week, the first thing they would do is, well, how are we going to do this in the Time of Horrors? Where are we going to find a place where we can rest for a week? It would make it impossible.
Right. And I think that's actually, you've actually hit the point. The way to make it work is to talk to your players and make sure they understand a few things. One is, we're not playing it's not heroic fantasy anymore. You are now playing investigation and or investigative horror. That's the game. It is a different game. It uses the same skeleton. You already know, you know how to play. You could look at a pre-gen and you could play in 3 seconds. It's that simple. You only need to know what you just know. And the GM needs to know a few things. So that's the first thing, that this isn't D&D. It is Whispers in the Dark or whatever other game you happen to be playing, just because it uses the same rules. And so as investigative horror or as an investigative game, there are different focuses. And so I actually mentioned that in Whispers, and I mentioned it in the playtesting a lot, was I told the DMs or asked the DMs, make sure that people playing this go into this understanding that if you run into something, you may not walk away. And when I write my adventures, I also take that into account as well, because there are rules that says, well, let's say you get mugged and you fight back, or you get mugged and you get hurt enough that you go to the hospital. Well, there's a clock, especially in the first adventure, which is the Crow Man. There's a sequence of events. It takes about a week. If you get hurt so bad you're in the hospital, the Crow Man succeeds at his task. Which brings us to the second part, which is that it's not the end of the world to get a TPK. It's not the end of the world to kind of quote unquote lose at your game or your scenario or your adventure. And I've something I've kind of talked about online a few times, and most folks kind of are on the same page, which is that the game, you don't win or lose the game by the actions of your characters. You win or lose the game by whether or not you enjoyed your evening.
I agree.
That's literally, that is it. If you enjoy it, you won.
Yes.
We all have busy lives. We all have a lot of things we have to deal with all the time, and playing a game, I mean, if I get to play a game for 2 hours, I've already won, because I've got 2 hours of my day that's fun and relaxing. That doesn't happen all the time. Doesn't happen often. And you know what? I've won. So that's great. So the fact that, my character died, whatever. As long as we enjoyed it and maybe we beat the scenario itself overall, I think it still works. And so the GM needs to make sure the players understand that. The GM also needs to have some sort of agility and kind of an understanding that, well, the best story I ever heard was some little kid was playing the game and his elf died. And he looked all upset, and then he just kind of grabbed a pencil, wrote a few things, and then brought it back. And the GM's like, well, who's your character? And he just wrote Junior on the back at the end of the name. And he was right back there. And like, what? That's exactly what we need to think of is, let's say your character, Rosine, she dies. That's fine. Well, maybe Rosine had a sister to take up the charge, or a brother, or a cousin, or a friend, or the grocer. Who knows? I mean, it can be anybody. The story moves. The story can keep going. And, I can't think of any story that we like where the hero or the main person just beats down everybody the entire time. That's boring. Not if we're thinking of a novel or a movie or a show. The most fun ones are where, like, I watch Runaways with my girls. Those kids in Runaways get the crap beat out of them on and off throughout. They keep losing, but they keep trying, and eventually they win. And I think that's a fun story. You can lose 8 times, but if you win the 9th, you won, right? I mean, it's the last that matters the most. It's keep getting back up. And again, I think that's what this is. Other games do it great. Call of Cthulhu is obviously a game I don't think anybody's going to be surprised that I love that game. Delta Green, all the different D20 or D100 games like Delta Green, Call of Cthulhu, Trail of Cthulhu is not a D100 game, but those games have that similar aspect where it's about the story as much, or probably more, than it is about the progression, the personal power, and the personal progression of that character. So, that's Pathfinder, that's D&D, and those are great games, but it's a different game. And I think a lot of folks want something different, but they want to be able to play it. I mean, gosh, the Critical Role Call of Cthulhu game, didn't they have like 1 million hits in a day?
It was amazing. That was so good to see. That was amazing to see.
It was. You know what? Because, I mean, we need to see and know that there's a lot of games out there that are great. They're really, I mean, honestly, I have a bookshelf behind me of games that are great, that are not D&D. And I love D&D. I've played D&D for 30 years, but I love Call of Cthulhu. I loved Rifts, those old Palladium games that were so gonzo. I like a lot of games. Kids on Bike, Monster of the Week, all this stuff is so good. And you can get a different experience. And so knowing that there's 1 million people, 1 million critters that love that that Call of Cthulhu game. I remember Mike Mason tweeting out, like, I ran out of stuff. And Call of Chaosium is not small. I know that's crazy too, is folks like, well, who are these people? Like, they are the second largest in the world. Yep. They are bigger in Europe than they are here. And it's kind of moving, here being US, and US they're moving up. But in Europe, they're number 2, and there are places in Europe they're number 1. I think Japan, and they're number 1.
Probably Germany as well. Yeah,
there's places in the EU too. So you've got somebody that's bigger than Pathfinder that ran out of stock because of critters. And this is why, I mean, honestly, I started this game 2 years ago, maybe more. But if I could get the critters to be like, that's what I want to play. They are my target audience. I'm going to be perfectly honest. Critical Role fans, you are my target here. I want to give you a game that is very roleplay heavy, that is investigative, that does have some horror stuff, that you can sink your teeth into, and it will play totally different than that D&D game that you would play on Tuesdays. Maybe this will be your Sunday game. We've got time for you there. And it's a game, too, I'm going to support. I know we're going in tangents here, but you'd ask me about the Kickstarter. Well, the Kickstarter is a product, or actually it's a pair of products. It's The Devil's City is kind of the Kickstarter steam, and The Devil's City is a novella that I wrote with Sarah Tantlinger. Sarah is an incredibly talented author. Sarah won a Bram Stoker Award, which is basically horror's top award,
Okay.
for her poetry collection that is, shockingly enough, based on H.H. Holmes, which is what these books are about as well. Sarah actually is also on the final ballot right now for another story she wrote last year, To Be Devoured, which is super good. Sarah's just awesome. She's great. And in case you're scared and you're worried, I told Sarah to make sure she keeps me in line. And if I'm holding her back, just to fire me. And I will keep her on the book and I'll take my name right off. She's happy with what I wrote. So Sarah and I wrote a novella. It's about 100 pages. And the novella is set in 1893 in Chicago, Illinois during the World's Fair, the World's Exposition. So this was the first World's Fair after the Paris one. And the Paris Exposition was one that was never, ever going to be topped because that's when they unveiled the Eiffel Tower.
Yes.
So there's a little bit of pressure on the city.
Yeah.
And so this book goes over, there's two books again. So The Devil's City, though, is about H.H. Holmes and his building of the murder castle, which Google that. It's fascinating. And he stalked the streets of the World's Fair. And he was America's first serial killer. He was at about the same time as Jack the Ripper. There were folks that thought they were the same person.
Wow.
In some cases. And Holmes was eventually caught and confessed, I think, 27, 29 murders. There are some folks that believed as many as 200. And his home, or his hotel, which is the murder castle, was integral in that. And this is a thing that actually existed, where he had rooms that were piped in with gas. So that he could suffocate people. He had walk-in safes. He had vats of acid, kilns large enough to put, like, for a crematorium. I mean, these all happened. And nobody ever made a game about this. There's an old Polygon or Polyhedron article that is really neat, actually, and goes over some of it. But, you know, we're making a book and a game. So the book, again, is Sarah and I, we were picking 5 victims and 5 people that we follow. And you'll see them from being identified to captured to, you know, they're being in Holmes's basement and being under his power. And that's where the book ends. The book has a beautiful cover by Thomas Boatwright. I have art. So the book, again, it's going to be a really pretty hardback, heavy paper, gorgeous art. You know, it's a collectible hardback. Sam Araya is doing it. Sam did King in Yellow art for Art Dreaming, which is amazing. Francois Vaillancourt, he's a wonderful artist up in Montreal. He's done a lot of books for Stephen King. And then Daniel Serra is doing a couple pieces. They're actually, I bought pieces from Daniel. Daniel's in, he's in Spain. I can't remember where specific in Spain, but Daniel's in Spain. Daniel did a piece for me in Whispers, actually. So we have gorgeous art within the book itself. So it's a illustrated novella. Mm-hmm. And so you learn about these 5 victims, and at the end of the book, you see what's going on. Then you can go, if you want, if you're interested, then you go to the RPG. And the RPG is called The Horror in the Windy City. And the first scenario is going to be a campaign, or kind of a mini campaign. You wake up on a table in the basement of the murder castle. And you're one of the 5 victims that was in the novella. So think of it as the coolest handout you can ever give your players. And you hand them this book, this novella. Again, it's a fast read. It's 80 pages. You know, I think we'll end up around 18,000 words, I think, once I put a little bit more things in there. So a couple hours to read. And you can always just read the sections about your character. And you wake up and you know them. And you are them. And you wake up in the basement. And that's how it starts.
That sounds really dark.
Oh, yeah. We did say horror. And it is dark. But you know what? Again, you actually, so if we read this, so the novella does really well by itself. There will be a pretty hardcover version for folks that want to collect them. There will be an inexpensive ebook if folks just want to read it. And you know, we read these books, and some of the books, especially a horror book or a spec fiction book, what happens? What happens afterwards? We scream at the TV when we're watching a movie, like, I wouldn't do that. That's stupid. They should do this. Well, now you can. You tell them what to do because you are playing the character. So it's almost like a movie type, video game type experience, or more like a video game type experience, but with your friends at a table, playing your game.
This game, I can foresee some challenges because the characters are going to be put in some absolutely potentially horrific, as in really horrific situations. But there's a difference between having somebody in a horrific situation in a Call of Cthulhu game with a cult that doesn't really exist, to having them put in a horrific situation that actually potentially took place in the real person, and also putting the GM in a position of, you are going to be that murderer. It's a very close to reality sort of scenario. What kind of safety tools are you going to recommend people use to play this game and not take it too far in becoming uncomfortable, truly uncomfortable, and not fun for the people?
Exactly. Yeah. So one of the things I did when I wrote Lamplight, so Lamplight Sanitarium is also it is actually there's most of that is stuff that could have happened. Lamplight Sanitarium, which was my book from a year ago. I've worked in psychiatry. I've been in those institutions as a healthcare professional. I have seen ECT. I have seen those patients. I actually sat on a floor with kids and took care of them. And I struggle with my own things. We all do, I think. And I don't know that there's very many people that don't have some things that they have to struggle with and they work through in whatever manner they do. And it is incredibly important to me to be very respectful of that, for one thing. And then also equally important for me to make sure that everyone involved understands what they're reading ahead of time and what kind of game experience they're getting in ahead of time. So I kind of went over that a little bit in Lamplight, and there will be a similar section in this one, letting them know what you're getting yourself into and what to expect. If it's not a surprise, then it's, I want to make sure I've done my job to make sure that the GM understands and the players do. And so I always tell players and GMs, or GMs especially, tell your players that these are things that can happen, X, Y, Z, and it'll be there. They'll know. Will Jones and I talked about this actually, I don't know, last year. I did a series with Kobold Press that's on, I think it's on YouTube. It's on their Twitch, about just DMing in general and talking about things. And we did a lot of stuff talking about how to be a GM that plays and does horrific games, but is not a horrific person and is not having a bad experience and is presenting a situation or giving a game that people can enjoy. There's the X card, which is a fantastic, very easy thing where, again, if you don't know what the X card is, you have a card that has an X on it, and there's different permutations, but basically as soon as there's something that gets to the line that you don't want to cross as a player or a GM, you bring it up and stop. Everybody stops and they take
explanations, no nothing,
and you go somewhere else.
Yes.
And as much as the stuff that I write is definitely kind of adult themed, obviously, but it can be played down to a point or a subtlety where it doesn't have to be quite as bad. I don't do gore, hardly ever. I never do sexual violence. I never talk about sexual violence in any way, shape, or form. So there's definitely, and Sarah and I are on the same page there, and any author that I work with will be on my page. If they aren't, I will let them, give them all whatever they need to do. You do it on your own side with your things, because folks like that, I guess, but I don't. But anyway, and so again, we'll make sure it's very clear. And for folks like, well, what if I don't want to play the pre-gens? That's fine. We'll give you a way to do that too. There'll be a couple different kind of really interesting ways to play that scenario. I think, and again, if you want to tone it down, you can. As a DM, you can pretty easily do that. The DM is certainly in charge of the mood of the table and the game. And I think as long as everybody, again, is on the same page, understand it can be a really good experience. I think folks that play Call of Cthulhu or Trail or Delta Green end up being some of the folks that get really, really into role-playing games. they are the folks that tend to stay with it forever.
Yes.
Because it's a different experience. It's not that video game experience where I'm just trying to get my fighter, up a level
Mhm.
and hit harder, or my wizard throw a better fireball, or I don't, that sort of thing, which again, I love those games and those are a lot of fun, but it is a very different game. And so this is something I'm hoping kind of, again, gets those players that are looking for something more for the rule set they already know.
Is this going to be a one-time game, and once the scenarios are played, that's it, or is it going to have some level of replayability?
So I think it can, and so that kind of where we get to. So the RPG part, Horror in the City, is going to be, I don't know, I'm guessing 150 pages right now. What that means is it can be anywhere from 60 to 80,000 words, depending on how I do the fonts and whatnot. So it'll be substantial. It's going to cover Chicago from 1850 through 1899.
Ooh,
It will be a world book. It will be a book that you can take it and you can now play a campaign in Chicago, and you will
nice.
be good to go. Um, almost like a Tales of the Margrave or even Lamplight was similar to that. So my book or my specific scenario will be, again, you kind of wake up in the basement. There will be another scenario where I'm not sure if I'm going to write it or if I'm going to have one of my designers write it with me. But the other side of the story is, we kind of talked about this kind of very briefly, is, okay, so we've got our victims, in the basement.
Yep.
But what about the people outside? What about their friends, their family, their loved ones, the Pinkertons, the police, whoever? Well, that's the other side. So that's the rest of that campaign. So you're going to have people working their way up from the front or from the bottom, hopefully. And then you also can have people coming in from the front door going down. So you will have two very, very different experiences playing the game, as a victim trying to escape, and as a investigator or a hero
Mhm.
trying to break in. So that's actually, again, another way that, I feel like we'll probably end up being able to use the actual murder castle. Will probably take 6 to 8 sessions to play through,
Okay.
which is a mini campaign, which I think 6 to 8 sessions, which is,
That's a sweet number, yeah.
yeah, with my schedule, it's about 2 years of games, because it's going to take that long. But for a lot of folks, it's a couple months, maybe a
Yeah.
summer. Something, I think 8 is actually a really great number, because by then, especially with this, I do milestones. So by that point, you'll be basically at the highest level you can get, which is 10th. And you'll probably be ready to try something a little different anyway. And you know what? Your character might be crazy anyway, so might be time to bring in Junior.
When is the Kickstarter coming out?
So Kickstarter will start on, I had this in front of me and now I've already forgotten it. So let me grab it again. I've had to move it around.
That's okay.
So Kickstarter will be March 31st through April 29th. So we're going to go 4 weeks and 1 day.
Okay.
And again, it'll be 2 books. It'll be Horror in the Windy City and The Devil's City. The Devil's City is finished, actually. The novella went out today to reviewers for them to read. So I've got about half a dozen horror reviewers. If you're a tabletop reviewer and would like to read the book and review it, let me know. Catch me on Twitter at Matthew D. Corley. Always on there, too much. And so that's it. So again, I was kind of mentioned this before, and I went off on one of my tangents like I always do, but Whispers in the Dark for me is, I want to build this up almost like, like Rob Schwab did with Shadow of the Demon Lord. I'm not gonna, it's frustrating when we find these great books that the publishers make and then they don't really get the opportunity to follow it up. And I know exactly why. Like, I am basically having to say no to almost all work this year, except for Sandy and except for Wolfgang. Those are the only 2 people that I'm not saying no to for work this year. And even them, I'm saying less, because I want to write these books. So not a lot of folks can basically devote a year to hoping it works and paying, spending their own money to get this up. So, I have Whispers in the Dark right now, The Devil's City, Horror in the Windy City, those are coming. MT is doing some stuff too. Invitation Only is our first scenario, which is a sequel to the scenario in Crowman that's coming up. The Whispers in the Dark core book, so the actual big guy, that's probably going to be at the end of this year. Again, it'll be a Kickstarter because that's really the only way we can do it. I also licensed an intellectual property from John Taff, who is a fantastic horror writer called The Fearing, which I will be writing a supplement for Whispers. That's The Fearing.
Nice.
Um, there'll be some more little books, and then I have already just started reaching out to other authors about a book series for next year. So I've got a plan for about the next 18 months, which will include probably 3 scenarios, 3 hardbacks, and odds and ends. Broadsheets, little 2-pagers every once in a while too, so that people keep getting stuff. Again, I want it supported, and to be perfectly frank, I mean, if it's supported, I can make some money actually, which would be great. But also, again, I think it's a really neat game. I think it's got a lot of potential. I have a lot of really great artists and authors interested in helping with it, so I want to get them out there too, and see what they do.
Well, fingers crossed. I'm sure that it should work very well. It sounds really exciting and very, very different. And I get the feeling that anybody wanting a kind of harder, darker experience, a more mature one, sounds like the kind of product they would really enjoy.
I think so. And one thing though too, and I don't have, well, I have details that I can't quite share yet, but I am going to be writing a investigative game. I'm taking the horror out of it completely.
Okay.
And in that case, we're going Scooby-Doo. We're going Erie, Indiana. We're going, Gravity Falls, that kind of thing. And that game is going to be called Zoinks.
Okay.
Based on, the term from Scooby-Doo. And it will use Whispers in the Dark's rule set. It'll be classless. It'll be simple. I think somebody asked me about it. It's like, well, what are you going to do to make it easier? Because I want to make it basically ages 8 and up. So basically, if you can read a little bit and do bare addition, you should be able to play, for basically first graders on up. And they asked me what I was going to do. And I was like, well, we're going to use Whispers because you've already taken the classes out. That's the biggest crunch.
Yeah.
And obviously, Zoinks will not have sanity mechanics.
Okay.
We'll find something fun to do, but it won't be sanity. So Zoinks is going to be kind of done in the background. And I'm hoping to make it one of my philanthropy projects like I did, which was like Harper's Tale, which we just, the book I did for my daughter. Harper's Tale, we've given Friends of Kids with Cancer $10,000 cash.
Wow, that's good.
I'm giving them 165 books, which I will then sell for them, and that'll probably get them another $3,000 or $4,000. And Harper's Tale is straight D&D. It's straight fantasy. It's a forest thing. It's almost in layout. It'll be in layout probably by the end of this month, for release in January, or not January, in April-ish. Again, that was for my daughter, and so there's another philanthropy organization that I've worked with that helped me and my daughter, that we will probably do another project with, and it'll be Zoinks related.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. I really looking forward to it.
I know you don't have to love horror. I get it. I know it. It's okay. But I think you should like to be solving mysteries at the very least. And that's what I tell my daughters. Like, you don't have to read and watch the movies Daddy likes. It's okay. But let's solve mysteries and do that kind of stuff. It's definitely not for everybody. But I think between Whispers and Zoinks, I think I should have the entire world covered. I hope.
Excellent. Well, I very much look forward to seeing that. Right. To wind down a little bit, because we've been at it for a while, I have 3 final questions.
Of course.
Okay. Question number 1. What is the best advice that no one has ever given you?
Ooh.
Exactly.
I feel like everybody, I don't know, maybe I'm old. I've gotten advice. I don't know. I ask questions. Oh, geez. I don't know. I think failing, this is advice people have given me, but it's still important. I think failing forward is okay.
Mm-hmm.
As in games and life and everything, it's okay to not do well. As long as you learn, and maybe next time you do a little bit better, and just keep, you build on stuff, everything. I definitely didn't start out where I am today. Start there. I got here. This is 43, almost 44 years of a lot of pleasant and unpleasant experiences. that got me here. And I think we can all say that, you can learn from absolutely anything. I mean, my daughter's, leukemia diagnosis last year was easily the worst day of my life. I get a little bit, I eat still over a year later, but we learned a lot. We got stronger for it. She's doing great. We've met great people. We've had the opportunity to help people. I have folks sharing their stories now. I mean, almost anything can have something redeeming about it. And I think that's not, my parents probably told me that, but I couldn't think of something nobody's ever told me. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's a very hard question, and that's an absolutely beautiful answer. So good on you. Okay, second question. What's the best mistake that you would like to make again?
Best mistake. This is going to sound awful. So my oldest daughter was not planned.
Okay.
She's not a mistake, but that's always the joke, like, well, daddy's little mistake or whatever. She is not a mistake in any way, shape, or form, but not planning to have children and then having them anyway. That was pretty awesome.
Excellent. Okay, last question. Imagine that you have a time machine and you go back in time because, that's what you would do. And you go back in time and you meet your 10-year-old self and you tell him, do not do this. What is this?
Do not compromise on things that bring you joy.
Love that.
I think that's probably the biggest thing.
And that is an absolutely fantastic answer. Matt, thank you so much for being with me today. I'd love to have you back at some point to talk more horror and horrific stuff. Because, I get the feeling that you really get horror much further than Call of Cthulhu gore or that sort of stuff. And I am very interested in hearing a lot more from you about that genre. So I'd love to have you back at some point.
Oh, I love to talk on podcasts. Ask anybody I've been on a podcast with. It's like, we'll take an hour and then 90 minutes. Like, oh man, I gotta go. Shoot. I love talking about all this stuff. I enjoy it. Yeah, it's fun. I think that's the biggest thing is like a lot of folks ask me, well, how do you do this or how do you do that? Like there's two reasons, I guess. I always tell people I don't watch TV, and I really don't. I read constantly, but I don't watch TV. The other one is I enjoy working, or at least I enjoy the things I work on. Okay. And that makes it a lot. You can still burn out, probably burn out easier because you're always working. But again, I think that's it, work on things you like.
But at least you burn happy. That's good.
Yeah. Take time for yourself every once in a while. So.
Yes, agreed. Matt, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I had a great time.
I can tell you I'm going to take a look at that Kickstarter. No kidding. Because it just sounds too good. It just sounds too weird, too dark. It just sounds too way out there for me not to pay attention to it. And I think you should really pay attention to it as well. Let me know if you are going to, because I love to hear from you. Thank you, truly. Thank you very, very much indeed for being there. It is genuinely appreciated. Please remember to leave me your comments. You can get hold of me in Twitter. I am at GMS Magazine. You can also email me at podcast@gmsmagazine.com. And you can get us in the Facebook page as well. Thank you once again for being there. And until the next time, I will talk to you very, very soon. Take care.